This Voice of San Diego podcast is sponsored by Manolatus Nelson Murphy, Advertising and Public Relations. M&M brings decades of experience and their vast network to you. The firm develops insightful strategies and cost-effective tactics to help clients achieve their goals and connect to those who matter most. M&M specializes in media relations, community engagement, crisis communications, and cross-platform marketing. Learn more at mnmadpr.com. As a nonprofit news organization, Voice of San Diego depends on our members and sponsors. If you'd like to become a sponsor, contact us at development@voiceofsandiego.org.
Thanks for joining us on the Voice of San Diego podcast. I'm Scott Lewis, editor-in-chief at Voice, joined as ever by assistant editor Andrew Keats.
What's up?
And Sarah Libby's our managing editor.
Hello.
Hi. All right, we have a good show today. We'll be talking about community choice aggregation. See if it still has the choice part.
5 years later, still rolls right off.
Rolls off the tongue.
Intermodal Transit Center and community choice aggregation.
Nothing
Gonna
beats
get together.
Intermodal Transit Center.
It's true. We got the Green New Deal. What is that? We will also have a special Hero and Goat section this week. I am trying to hold myself back from being too fired up about that.
Don't
want to
Just let it go, bud.
just let it go.
Yeah.
All right, fine. And then local reporter Claire Tregesser will come in, and she's going to talk about a series she's been doing on KPBS called Dr. J's. It's about a shooting in southeastern San Diego a long time ago, well, a while ago, that still reverberates on there. But first I wanted to talk about the news that came that was of national significance. Locally, it didn't really resonate nationally, though, but it seemed like a big deal. Was it 5 prototypes? 8?
There were a lot.
There are a few prototypes of what a wall would look like on the border that have now been torn down.
It was news that there were that many kinds of walls
Yeah.
to begin with.
Apparently, if you're trying to get through a wall like that, you just need a backhoe because they came down pretty easy.
Yeah, they just swung a backhoe. But luckily, there are very few backhoes in the world. You can't really find them that simply. Yeah.
I think that I was most sad to see the comb version come down. You know, the one with the top, the solid part, and the comb.
Like Spaceballs?
Yeah, it looks like Spaceballs. You know, again, like this doesn't feel like it got enough reckoning. That this went up and didn't matter.
It was always treated like a reasonable part of a policy debate.
Right.
And it absolutely is not that. I mean, even if you want to say that, like, we should have a debate on the merits of a wall, like, it still is not a reasonable part of that discussion. Because, well, first of all, we're using the word prototype for a slab of concrete that separates 2 areas.
Yeah, it's a wall.
It's a wall. We have a lot of them. We know what they are well.
A really
we know
solid idea of what that is.
We know what they look like. The height can change. The width can change. The materials can change. But fundamentally, we get the technology.
It's as the president says, goes back a while.
Yeah,
It does.
It goes back.
Wheels.
I think Andy's right that maybe the most absurd part of this was that he came here to look at them.
To really decide, I like that version.
Look at that.
Because
look at that one.
Which wall do you like? Oh, this choice. That's a good
You gonna
wall.
look at this one, though?
Look at that wall down there, though. That's good.
He liked the ones that you could remember. The big insight that he got from the Border Patrol was that they needed to be see-through, which eliminated all of them except for the comb.
Again,
Also, that's not a wall.
and didn't require building anything to know. It's not like the Border Patrol didn't see the prototypes and go, "We're gonna have a problem here. Can't see through these."
No, they did. I think
really
they
can't
did.
see
They were
the
like,
other side of
we're not
this."
so into that one. Remember? And then they got those like SWAT teams to come in or whatever and try to get through them.
And they were like, "Well, we could climb the wall."
And then one guy's like, we could bring a backhoe.
Yeah.
So
it just from beginning to end, just absurdity piled upon absurdity.
What a journey.
Yeah. Just millions of dollars went to this stupid waste of time.
And not just federal dollars, too. Like the city and county, city of San Diego and the county.
Our local officers watching these
Had to
pieces of
guard.
wall day and night.
Not the actual wall. They had to guard the fake walls.
If you are a spouse of one of those officers, tell me about what your spouse said when they came home from staring at walls for 8 hours every night. No, still no protest at the wall.
To protect the fake wall. All right, so that happened this week. It's gone. We'll forget about it, apparently, as like so many other things that we have embarked on since this roller coaster began. Okay, so this week we got a bunch of news. This week, the Board of Supervisors and the City Councils in San Diego, Encinitas, and Carlsbad voted to embark on a new plan to take over the job of buying electricity from SDG&E. They call it community choice, but the choice was supposed to be between the new public entity and misconduct by school officials.
That's an interesting choice.
I'll take the renewable energy. That would be my preference.
Can we keep all of this?
All right, the choice was supposed to be between
the script here.
The choice was supposed to. The choice was supposed to be between the new public entity and SDG&E, but now SDG&E wants out of the business entirely, so it's a little unclear to us what the choice will be. We'll have some stories about that, I think. Maybe the choice was already made. Now, we did a story this week, Rai Ravar did, about how labor unions are looking to make sure their members get the work on some of these projects. So, like SDG&E says, we need a big solar farm, right? And so labor wants to make sure that if the new entity goes out and says we need a new solar farm, that they get the jobs, right? Yeah. Is that a fair summary?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this was Rai has written about this. This was kind of, as they were getting towards this city council vote, there was a discussion about whether there would be basically a union hiring requirement attached to this renewable energy decision. And it ended up not mattering much in this instance, specifically because Maura Elliott, city attorney, put forward a legal opinion that said you can't do that anyway right now.
Right. It's too early, essentially.
Basically, it's too early. And that is all well and good for now. It allows things to keep moving forward, allows them to keep establishing momentum. But it doesn't really put to bed the question that may still come about in the future about whether you have a sufficient number of votes to approve this thing if it in fact requires a union hiring provision.
Yeah, basically she said that if you want to do that, the new entity is the entity that will have to do that, right? They have agency, they will have their own board of directors or whatever. They'll get to decide that.
Yeah, so
which was something the mayor and city council were like, oh shoot,
I'm sure they were very disappointed by that.
We were desperate to make this decision today. We've been entrusted. So I don't know. That's ends up being something, I guess, that we still have to keep an eye on in the future. And it might be the case that this thing keeps building more momentum, and in 2 years, the political makeup of these bodies continues to move to the left, and it becomes less contentious, and so maybe it ends up never being an issue. But I guess basically this vote didn't, to the extent that it's an issue right now, this vote didn't really settle it.
Yeah, and labor unions across the state haven't exactly been the most excited about these type of agreements, right? Like in the Bay Area, the electrical workers were like, no, we don't want that. We got a good relationship with the current PG&E, so like let's just keep that. Now here they're obviously a little bit more positive, it seems like, but even then they came out with like a joint statement saying like, well, we're gonna work on making it work, right?
Yeah, and Council President Georgette Gomez issued a statement after the fact. It didn't seem to promise anything, but it was largely supportive that eventually this decision will include some sort of local hiring requirement with a wage standard, which usually means unions.
Right. So the other bit of news sort of related that came out this week, or I guess last week, was this idea of a Green New Deal. Now, the primary drivers of this whole CCA movement in San Diego has been the Climate Action Campaign and Nicole Capritz, who has been a longtime political mover in town, and now she's leading this, and she put out this Green New Deal and got a bunch of politicians to sign on to it, but we're not quite sure what it is.
Yeah, it seems like I'm the only person in town that's confused about this. But so I saw that there was this Green New Deal idea. And I thought
San Diego Green New Deal,
San Diego,
to be
yes,
clear.
This is distinct from the national one. And I said, well, okay, I should take it upon myself to figure out what's in that. There's
Now, at first, you're picturing like some portfolio of policies,
projects,
investments.
market mandates of some kind, maybe. Who knows? Could be a lot of different things. Is it going to happen at the city level, county level, Sandag, MTS? What is it? And so I watched this video that they had put together, and it didn't clear up much more than San Diego Green New Deal. And then I looked, and somebody said, well, there's a fact sheet about it in the Climate Action Campaign's report cards that they issued for different cities. So I went to that, and I looked, sure enough, table of contents, Green New Deal, went to it as bulleted list, and it's like a list of the things that will be part of the discussion when they decide what's in it. But it isn't a list of what is in it. And then I saw that Assemblyman and mayoral candidate Todd Gloria had said that he endorsed it, and Councilman Chris Ward said he endorsed it. So I asked them, what is it?
What did you endorse?
This thing you've endorsed, what is it? Chris Ward did not respond to me.
Just nothing.
Nothing, no response. Nick Serrano, spokesman for Todd Gloria, said, it's really a vision for the San Diego we should have. A San Diego that prioritizes climate action and promotes equity and justice for all its residents, no matter your zip code. Todd supports a Green New Deal locally and nationally because it's in line with his vision for a new San Diego that goes beyond business as usual and deals with the real problems San Diegans are facing.
Well, that clears that up as to what's in it.
That seems like a good description of his view of what is good policy.
Sure.
But I don't know what a Green New Deal is still.
When you go to that fact sheet, it is kind of a statement of like principles, right? Like
it includes
things.
It includes like territorial respect for indigenous people.
So
tribes.
one thing I noticed is that after the city council made its decision on the CCA, Nicole Capretz was, celebrating this and had hashtag San Diego Green New Deal. So apparently the CCA decision is like retroactively part of it.
Yes.
But certainly we've been talking about a CCA for years now, and it was never
part of this thing. And she also tweeted that the affordable housing bond measure that people have been pushing that might go on the ballot in November of 2020, that would be part of it.
Okay.
So if I may.
Yeah, go for it. Now, I asked you, what is this? And you had, I think, as good as any an explanation. And I'm genuinely not trying to be a jerk about this.
No, it's your.
I maybe have a too concrete of a mind, and I want to see the list of
your
projects.
Mind is very concrete. Yeah.
Okay.
So no, I think if anything, I think it's probably
Head is concrete.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Don't laugh at that. The idea is like, I think what they're trying to do is put an overall branding around this whole thing, because I think they're starting to anticipate, what I think is going to be a big deal, which is that the policies of these things that are happening right now, the climate action plan at the city, the things that it requires the city to do, the switch to the new power company, these are all policies that have been like set in motion right now. And I think the policies are like 5 years ahead of the politics, and that the politics haven't caught up, that there's going to be a moment where the residents, the folks out there, not the diehard Voice of San Diego politics podcast listeners, but a lot of the others.
Stroking the ego of the listeners. Well done.
Yes,
always a good
they're
strategy.
Very smart people.
Yes.
And that all of the people out there are going to start to have to face the transformation that they're really describing for this region. And this is an effort to sort of get on board with like getting them ready for that.
Yeah, I think it's about like instilling urgency in people far more than it is about like, we have to pass a CCA and we have to pass an affordable housing bond and we have to do this and this and this, and like ticking off a specific list.
And I think,
if I may, that is a good description of why this is strategically wise, but I still don't know what it is.
Right. And I think there's definitely a big hole in what it is department.
I'd like to know.
There is
is it going to be will it exist at a public agency, or is it just a hashtag that can be affixed to any decision made by any public agency?
I think that the whole region
Yeah.
The way that they're picturing, I mean, people are going to bike like 10 times more than they do now. How much is that? Like a lot more. They're going
I
to,
think it's more like 18 times more.
we're not going to drive cars. We're going to take over the energy buying. We're going to build a ton of homes. We're going to live differently. All of these things aren't getting through to the masses, and I think they're all like, well, we better start getting ready for that. And that means, oh, this thing that's happening, that's part of the Green New Deal. That's what they want. I think I agree that I think what probably happened is they saw the Green New Deal nationally and they're like, that's cool, let's do that, and just kind of brought the words over.
Yeah. Well, when you guys figure it out what is in it, tell me, please. I should also add one thing we haven't said. One of the explanations I've been given about why they would not like to tell me what's in it is because they are very committed to this like bottom-up, open process of creating it, and different,
except for the name,
different cities and different public agencies and different nonprofit groups and constituents, and this, that's not going to be lip service. They really want that process to determine what's in it. And again, I understand that, but that makes it hard for me to get it right now because I guess I'm dumb.
All right. Yeah. Well, our hero of the week. So this is one of those heroes where somebody just kind of did their job and we're like really stoked about it. But this is Hasan Akrada from obviously the executive director of Sandag. Last week, for the first time since we revealed their faulty financial projections, leaders of the San Diego Association of Governments acknowledged that they would not be able to make good on several freeway expansion projects and other promises made to voters in 2004. That also confirms that the agency's attempt in 2016 to get a new tax increase to sort of expand on that 2004 tax increase would have largely backfilled those old promises. And that's not something they ever told us.
Yeah. And it's worth knowing that like all of the information that informed this decision when it was finally owned up to by Hasan Akrada at Sandag last week was known in October of 2016 by the agency when I first issued my first investigative report on this. This is not a changing series of events after the fact. This is every bit of information required to make this decision was known at the time.
And I wrote a column this week because I really wanted to drive home. I feel like this is a big just thing that we really need to sit with for a little while. And especially the idea of like that tax increase that they were pushing in 2016, half cent, it would have backfilled these old projects. It was almost like it was like a Ponzi scheme that was starting to show some of its losses, some of its problems. They needed one big investor to come in to hide that, and the investor didn't come, and we actually got a chance to reckon with what would happen, and we wouldn't be there, I don't think, if it had passed.
One point that you made that kind of resonated with me was that while it's really refreshing to see somebody kind of own up to this reality and speak truth about it, it would also be nice if like the leaders who were wrong at the time did that more. Gary Gallegos is gone, but I would like to see people own up to mistakes they made and speak truth about them, have the people who made those mistakes be saying things like this.
Yeah.
I got in a Facebook discussion with former National City Mayor Ron Morrison back in December 2016 about how significant my revelations were. And let me tell you, my comments in that discussion have aged a lot better than his.
Congrats. Yeah.
But I'll just say that the actions of the Sandag board just changed quite a bit. Their responsibilities will now, in addition to sketching out this new vision for like projects over the next 40 years, they will spend a lot of time deciding which of these old projects live and which ones die, and telling their constituents which things that they may have been expecting, which things they thought they voted to fund, are in fact not part of the future.
Yeah. Our GOAT of the week.
You lose! Good day, sir!
All right, this one goes to State Senator Ben Hueso and City Attorney Mara Elliott for a bill that was made public this week that they are pushing. So let's back up. Several women a couple years ago revealed to Voice of San Diego that they had been groped and harassed by a teacher at La Jolla High School, and that their complaints to school officials had gone nowhere. And it set us off on a big investigation of these types of misconduct cases in public schools. Lorena Gonzalez announced a bill to address some of these issues that we've revealed. We were only able to uncover these cases thanks to public records that were made available to us. So what Ben Hueso's bill would do, and apparently it's being sponsored by Mara Elliott, is make it far, far harder to pursue some of those public records in court. And court is really the only avenue that we have to secure records when a government agency refuses to release them or says that they should be exempted from certain requirements. You can go to court, and crucially, you can collect attorney's fees if a court determines that the record should go to you. And so that's really often the only incentive that agencies have to give up these records is that financial piece of it. So this would really set the bar far, far higher for the public and really make it so that the public would have to pay for the government to comply with its own law.
Yeah, I think in particular there's a case in Sweetwater where we threatened a lawsuit and if they didn't give us over documents about a teacher who had been accused of hurting some of these kids. And we wouldn't have gotten those documents had we not been able to threaten the lawsuit. And that threat wouldn't have carried any weight if there wasn't the possibility that they would have to pay us back for the attorney's fees that lawsuit would have to cost us. And so the whole consequence, the only consequence for not complying with the Public Records Act in California is that this might happen to you. And they're trying to water that down by saying that we'd have to prove that they willfully tried to keep those documents from us as opposed to just didn't do it.
Yeah. The attorneys I talked to said that that's a standard that would be basically impossible to meet. So it would really render the whole thing meaningless.
On the other side of the break, KPBS's Claire Trageser and her series on a gang murder in Southeast San Diego. Be right back.
At the tone, please record your message. When you've finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
Hey, Steve. This is Nate John from Voice of San Diego, just calling for our quick discussion on the People's Reporter question that you asked about trash. I will call you again in a little bit so we can talk. All right, bye.
Hi, my name is Susanna, and I'm calling in about the roads on 28th Street.
My question is about street paving.
I've been wondering how many people who live in downtown San Diego also work downtown.
At Voice of San Diego, we're here not only to dig up information no one knows about, we're also here to answer questions everyone has. We've gotten a lot of great questions so far through this feature called The People's Reporter, and we want to get more so we can answer more. If you're curious about something in San Diego, head to our site and ask. You can do it now at vosd.org/ask. That's vosd.org/ask.
Okay, we are back. Over the last week, KPBS's Claire Trageser has been releasing a podcast series called Dr. J's. It's about a shooting in Lincoln Park 16 years ago that was itself part of a gang battle, but left 2 women dead who were returning from church on New Year's Eve. A boy was shot while shielding his cousin from the shooting, and the kids both survived. And we have a clip from the series here.
Even both sides were mad that it was supposedly one side that did it and one side, the area that it was done at, felt like they was getting attacked them. But then these 2 women who had families, who people knew it happened in their area, so now they're mad because they think this side did it, this side's mad at whoever did it, but now more people are being killed, more people are being incarcerated. So it's a ticking, not even a ticking time bomb, it's exploding at this point.
All right, Claire joins us in the studio. Hello, Claire.
Hi.
Thank you for coming in.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so tell us, where did you get this idea to follow this particular event?
Yeah, so it started this past summer with the death of Earl McNeil, who's the man who went into a coma and died after being arrested by National City Police. And I was covering that story along with another reporter at KPBS and just started hearing from people who lived in the area that Earl McNeil was actually a witness in the trial that came out of this shooting, and people were saying, this shooting where these 2 innocent women were killed was a big deal for our community and is still having impacts. And I had sort of heard about the shooting. I didn't live in San Diego at the time, but as they were talking about it more, saying, all of these things have changed because of it, I was thinking, well, that's a really interesting story. And so I started looking into it. And Armand King, who we just heard the clip in the intro, was one of the people who talked about it the most. So
Right. So this was in 2003?
Yes, the shooting was in 2003. So this is 16 years later, but it's still something that people talk about all the time.
Right. So I'd heard about it because it was kind of a big deal in the city attorney's race.
Right.
Bob Hickey, who was running for the job as city attorney for the city of San Diego, he's a DA, he's a prosecutor. He talked about it a lot in depth, but he actually wouldn't talk about it with you. I thought that was so odd.
I know. It's funny because I covered that race, and I have the interview that I did with him for KPBS when I was covering that race, and he kept bringing it up and saying, because he was really proud of the work that he did on it, and I didn't know what he was talking about, so I didn't really ask him about it. I was like, okay, sure, whatever, back to the issues in the city attorney's race. And now that I desperately wanted to interview him, I listened back to that interview, and I'm like, ask him something else, but I just kind of let it go. Right. I think I would have loved to talk to anyone from the DA's office, but particularly him for this story. My guess is that the reason is because of Earl McNeil, because the DA did the investigation of the officers who were involved in his death, that because that happened, now they just don't want to touch it. They don't want anyone from their office to talk about it.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask another point. So it seems like there's kind of a few stories within your story. One of them is just how that shooting changed the city and changed that neighborhood, and how that, we still feel a lot of that change happening now. And we're going to get into that, I'm sure. And then the other part was actually whether this was a wrongfully convicted person for the shooting.
Right.
Did you have trouble deciding at all which route to really dig into?
I think I was telling Andy recently, it's not Serial. It's not the San Diego Serial podcast. I mean, a lot of people who live in that area say that it is a wrongful conviction. And obviously the man who was convicted and his family say that he didn't do it. They want the Innocence Project to pick up his case. I think, it was important to me to just stay focused on the community impact, because I didn't want it to be that kind of true crime podcast. So it was all about, I would start going down the rabbit hole of this and that, and I'd say, okay, that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to talk about the overall impacts. But obviously there's still elements of the trial and the case against him that are included in this.
Well, let me ask just why? Why wouldn't you want to explore whether it was wrongful conviction?
I think that's just because that's not the type of podcast that we would do at KPBS. Those podcasts are really popular, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with them. But our mission and what we're trying to cover is more community impact, bigger than that.
One thing that fascinated me about this series, Andy and I have both from time to time covered policing in southeastern San Diego. And I think certainly the community's sense over the last few years is that it's over-policed, and that young men especially are stopped and even harassed by police all the time. And so you identified not only that the shooting is kind of the origin story of the city's gang commission, but that it set off some tensions in the community between, older residents who thought that there should be more policing to respond to shootings like this. Do you think that dynamic that you identified has shifted at all now? Do you think the older residents still really crave a really intense police presence there?
I think that, yeah, for the most part. I mean, I think, I wouldn't say that this shooting and the reaction to it completely created this generational divide. There were obviously other elements at play, but it was a big part of it. And I mean, that generational divide is something that I've covered in previous stories, where the younger people are less willing to work within the system or, be nice at meetings. They'll like get up and have protests and, they just want things more urgently,
Right.
partially because they say of the relationship with police. Like, I think Aaron Harvey, the man who was arrested, in that landmark case with the DA for the gang affiliation, says like, anytime I'm stopped by police, I feel like I might die. So yeah, it's very urgent to me. So that's another part of it. But yeah, I think that it is still going on, and it even played out maybe in the city council race that they just had there, where Myrtle Cole, who was maybe more of like the establishment candidate and favored by older people in that area, lost to in a kind of surprising upset to Monica Montgomery.
Yeah, one of the things that I heard from your podcast and different reporting I've done in there is that the generational divide isn't necessarily just around like approach, like how you want to act at the gang commission, but a genuine view of how a community and is best served by a police presence.
Yeah.
And I think maybe one way to think about it in the city council race is that the reason Myrtle Cole said what she said that upset so many people about racial profiling is that that's probably what she actually thinks. That it wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a Kinsley gaffe, as they say, where you accidentally say what you really mean. And
I've never heard that term before, but
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, well, she had a background in law enforcement.
Right. And so like,
well, yeah, and
her,
when you go back and like read what she was saying, it was like a pretty long thing that she said. It wasn't just like one accidental thing. So I think that maybe she didn't make her point like as clearly as she might have liked, but I don't think that I guess you would have to. Yeah, exactly.
And I think that she was probably unaware because of the generation that she's a part of. She probably didn't quite understand how offensive that would be to younger people.
Or maybe just how much power the younger people would have, because she said that in reaction to something that had already happened where she brought the police chief, Shelley Zimmerman, to that town hall meeting, and she felt like younger people who were there were being rude. And so then she was, she said that as an apology to Shelley Zimmerman and to other people who had been there. So I think, everything that happened after that maybe caught her off guard because she wasn't expecting younger people to have the political power that they did. I'm not sure. Yeah.
The sense within the community that this was a wrongful conviction, you said that's something you hear a lot from talking to people. Did that seem to be a belief that was generational itself, or split among political lines or anything like that, or was people that knew him? What, like, when you say people feel that way, was it, where did that sense come from?
I think it's more, people who knew him or people who knew other people who were involved in the case. In one of the stories, in one of the episodes, I highlight this guy who works with Paving Great Futures, Musla Abdul Hafiz, and he's like very active now. He gives out food at the Four Corners of Life every weekend just on his own. And he was kind of like peripherally involved in that case. So I think it more depends on just people's connection to it than necessarily a generation.
You did feel like you wanted to give that voice, though, right? I mean, you wanted to hear them out about their concerns that this horrific crime had maybe been pinned on somebody who didn't deserve it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I spend some time, I have Layla Aziz from Pillars of the Community talking about just in general, like she feels like the DA will just come in and find someone, that they can convict. She says, like, is this person, can we get enough people to say bad things about this person that then we can convict him and say our job is done? And she says, like, that shows that you don't care about my community. So I have that in there. But I also have, again, I couldn't talk to the prosecutor in it, but I have things that he said afterwards to the Union Tribune about, how he went about collecting informants, and that he would obviously disagree with that take.
It would certainly help explain kind of why this has lingered in the community, whether you want to get into vetting, whether he was wrongfully convicted or not. If people sort of have that sense, it would sort of explain to some extent why there hasn't been closure or why it's had the lingering impact that it has.
Yeah, for sure. That, and the fact that it was two older
Absolutely,
women who
yeah.
were like leaving church is probably like, you know, the epitome of innocent bystander situation. Not saying like people, but they were literally on their way home from this midnight New Year's Eve service, and there were two kids in the car, and those kids, you know, lived and are still, well, one of them is still in the area. So I think, you know, probably the combination of that.
Let's catch up just a little bit. So we've danced around him a little bit. The man that was convicted of the crime. Tell us about him and what you got to know about him.
So his name is James Carter, and he was eventually sentenced in 2011. So he actually hasn't been in jail that long. Like, it took a long time for them to find him and
that itself
him.
Was a source of major tension between the police in the area, right? That they hadn't found somebody yet.
Yeah, I mean, people were saying like, oh, if this had happened in La Jolla, you would have found the person by now. Like, why is it taking so long to arrest somebody for this? So there was continued pressure to get that done. And so it seems like he was involved in the Skyline gang, which was the gang that was responsible for the shooting. Like, that seems pretty clear that that's what happened, because there was a Lincoln Park gang shooting against Skyline the day before, and so Skyline was looking to retaliate, and this Dr. J's Liquor was kind of a known spot for people to hang out at. So I think the idea was to just go by and shoot at some people, and they ended up hitting these two women. So James Carter says that he wasn't there, like he didn't have anything to do with it. But it was clear, I guess, that he was at least affiliated somewhat with the gang. Whether he was an active member at that point, he disputes that.
Yeah. So the evidence against him, there was no physical evidence against him, which he reiterated to you.
Yeah,
at length,
lots of times.
Many times, right?
As you would if you felt like you were in jail for something you didn't do.
And Hickey, the prosecutor, concedes that there was no physical evidence, but says in a drive-by shooting, there almost never is going to be.
Right.
And then the case against him was basically, so far as I can tell, was the word of four. Four.
I mean, he has more, but he has four main. It's based on informants, and he has four main informants. He has some other people here and there, and he does have like some people who witnessed it and said, oh, I think that the guy who was shooting had long hair.
Yes.
Which James Carter has.
Yeah, if you had photos in your print version, he had slicked back long hair. Yeah. And then also that they found in his room some like rap lyrics and things that he had written that tied him to the gang that did it, right?
And he has tattoos that tie him to the gang.
So they established. So is it really would it be accurate to say that they can certainly connect the gang to the shooting, and they can certainly connect him to the gang,
right? But
the further connection from there is the witnesses said that the shooter had long hair, and he also had long hair.
No, I mean, there's that, and then there's the informants, like Earl McNeil saying, he told me he did it.
He told me he did it, right.
And, had some details of, like, he told me he had the AK-47, like, multiple people said that. So it is all based on informant testimony,
right?
All of whom got something in exchange for
one got just cash, right? Just cash relocation or something.
Yeah, no, a couple people got. I mean, Earl McNeil got money to leave San Diego, and the other informant that I had the tapes from got money and got let out of jail. So some people got reduced jail sentences, and then some people got money to leave. I mean, I think they get like their food and housing and things paid for.
Yeah. So we didn't hear much from him in the show. You said the recording was not particularly good from a jailhouse telephone.
Mm-hmm.
It was a cell phone that he had somehow gotten, right?
He said that he borrowed a cell phone from a friend.
So what was he like? How did he strike you?
He was funny. I mean, I kind of bring it up like, we talked a bunch of times, and most of the times he was like almost obsessively focused on the details of the case, which again makes sense if you feel like you're in prison for something you didn't do. I think he's having a hard time. So he's like, would say that he was pretty depressed, that he'd like tried to hurt himself in prison, which I wasn't able to confirm. And then like there was that one conversation that I played a clip from where he was just telling me about his son and that his son likes to write screenplays. And so I said, like, you know, he said, oh, I'm helping him write screenplays. And I said, you know, what are your movies about? And he started talking to me about his favorite movies. So like one time we had this really much longer, interesting conversation. But for the most part, he just, you know, wanted to talk about yeah.
And then the horror though of the shooting was kind of the seeds of a lot of different things that you talked about. Like one in particular was this group of men that got together, and then sort of as a response, the pillars of the community kind of come up. So talk about the men that got together and then this sort of backlash.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's backlash, but yeah, so after the shooting, this group, Black Men United, got started. And I think, you know, there had maybe already been like some rumblings, but the shooting was really like, you know, the catalyst for it that caused people to come together. And they said, you know, we're going to find who did this and we're going to try and get gangs to stop killing each other. And so they had this flyer out that had a reward for finding the killer. And then they started doing all this charity work and gang outreach. And Ricky Laster, who was the former head of the gang commission who passed away, was involved with that. So Pillars of the Community, I think, is maybe like a second generation nonprofit that's, I wouldn't say that it's like in reaction to that at all, because I think that they work with them, but it's just like maybe a different approach to doing things. And then the gang commission, Tony Young, the former councilman for the area, got the gang commission started because of the shooting, saying like, you know, this is getting out of hand. We need to do something, figure out a way to work with the police and city leaders.
I think there were a lot of these things that happened in southeastern San Diego too, like that led to the transformation of Lincoln High School as well. You know, a horrific shooting that sort of touched off like the need to get something done there. And then your piece, I think, ends with this discussion about gang violence has gone down. Now, we don't know why necessarily, but by quite a bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, in 2017 there was one gang-related murder in San Diego,
compared to
like there were, you know, upwards of 20, 25 a year in the time that this was going on. And there, you know, there will be like dips and then peaks, but it's overall trending down. There was a story in the Union Tribune in 2011 about there was like 1 month where there were a bunch of shootings, and William Lansdowne, the police chief at the time, said, all right, we're going to get a handle on this right away. And so he put 30 more officers in the area, and it did go down. And the community also kind of came together again to work against that.
Well, Claire Trageser, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
You can see the stories at kpbs.org/J, right?
Yes, and also they're on the San Diego Stories podcast. So if you prefer to just listen to podcasts, you can look there, and they're all called Dr. J 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can download them there easily.
Great. Well, thanks for coming in.
Thank you. I always listen to the whole thing. You never know what might be at the end.
That's true.
Did we get that recorded? Yep. All right, we'll use that later.
Well, thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast. Do not forget that we have our live show coming up. That's March 20th at Whistle Stop Bar. You can get tickets for that at voiceofsandiego.org/events. We'll all be there, and we'll put on a great show. I'm Scott Lewis, the CEO and editor-in-chief at Voice. Andy Keats is the assistant editor. Sarah Libby is the managing editor. And the show, of course, is produced by Nate John and Adriana Heldies. Thank you, and we'll talk to you next week.